fed my daughter. Now I belong to you by ancestral tradition," said the Apache mom to the cowboy. The sun rose slowly over the Arizona desert, casting long, golden rays across the rugged landscape. The air was dry and warm, carrying the scent of sagebrush and earth baked by the sun. In a small Apache settlement nestled between rocky hills and sparse groves of mesquite, life began as it had for generations. The community was tight-knit, with families depending on each other for survival. Water was precious, food was scarce, and every day brought challenges that required strength, patience, and cooperation. Among the families, Nahel, a strong and protective mother, prepared for the day ahead, her mind constantly on her young daughter Ahiana. Ahiana was 7 years old, full of curiosity and energy. Her laughter often echoed through the small village, bringing warmth to everyone who heard it. But life in the desert was not easy for children. They had to learn early to respect the land, understand the ways of their people, and know the dangers that could appear suddenly. Nahel watched Ahiana as she gathered small bundles of firewood near the edge of the settlement, the girl's tiny hands skillfully picking up dry twigs and branches. Nahel's eyes were sharp, noting every movement, every sound, ready to protect her child from harm. Far beyond the settlement, a lone cowboy named Samuel rode across the dusty trails. His hat was tilted low over his eyes, and the wide brim cast a shadow across his weathered face. Samuel had been traveling alone for weeks, following a herd of wild mustangs, hoping to capture one or two for trade. He was experienced in surviving the desert, knowing where to find water and which plants were safe to eat. Yet despite his skills, Samuel knew the land was unforgiving. One misstep, one wrong turn, could mean serious trouble. Samuel had learned to be cautious when approaching settlements. Tensions between the Apache people and settlers were high, and misunderstandings often led to conflict. Stories of raids, stolen horses, and fights traveled faster than the wind, making everyone wary of strangers. Samuel had no intention of causing trouble. He respected the Apache and their way of life, even if he did not fully understand it yet. As he rode closer to the settlement, he slowed his horse, observing from a distance. He noticed children playing near the edge of the camp, and among them, Ahiana's small figure caught his attention. That morning, the village had been busy with its usual routines. Women were grinding corn, men were repairing tools and fences, and the children played in the open spaces, learning lessons through games. Nahel had prepared a small breakfast for Ahiana, dried meat, corn, and berries collected the day before. But the girl had been so excited to explore that she had eaten very little. As she wandered toward a patch of wild grass, her small legs grew tired, and the heat of the sun pressed down heavily. Samuel, watching from a distance, noticed her wobble and then fall to the ground. Her tiny body looked weak and her lips were dry. Without thinking twice, he approached slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Nahel, observing from the corner of her eye, felt a surge of worry. Her heart pounded in her chest as she prepared to rush to her daughter. But she hesitated, watching the stranger. She noticed that he carried food and water. The cowboy knelt down gently, speaking softly in a calm voice. He offered Ahiana some dried meat from his pouch. The girl, too weak to respond, opened her mouth slightly. Samuel fed her slowly, carefully, making sure she did not choke. Nahel felt a mix of emotions: relief, caution, and curiosity. She had never seen a stranger show kindness in this way. The other villagers noticed too. Some whispered among themselves, unsure whether to trust this outsider. In Apache culture, feeding a child was a serious gesture. It was not something done lightly or casually. A person who provided for a child could become tied to the family in ways that were both respected and binding. Nahel knew this tradition well, and she understood the weight of the moment. Her eyes met Samuel's, and in that instant there was an unspoken understanding. He had acted out of pure kindness, but in doing so, he had crossed a cultural boundary that would have lasting meaning. Samuel, unaware of the full significance, continued to help Ahiana until her strength returned. He spoke softly, asking her simple questions about her favorite games and foods. Ahiana, shy at first, began to smile, encouraged by the gentle tone and patient care. Her laughter returned slowly, and Nahel's heart eased. She walked closer, her movements careful, studying the cowboy. She wanted to ensure that he had good intentions and that her daughter was truly safe. Samuel noticed her approach and gave a small nod of respect, understanding that he was entering a space where trust had to be earned. As the day progressed, Samuel stayed nearby, observing the settlement and helping where he could. He offered water to other villagers, repaired a broken fence, and shared knowledge of the land that the Apache found useful. Though he was a stranger, his actions began to speak louder than words. Nahel watched him closely, her mind full of questions. Who was he? Why had he come here? Could he be trusted, or was this kindness a trap? In her culture, every action had meaning, and she needed to understand the intentions of this man before allowing him any place near her family. By midday, the sun was high, casting a harsh glare over the land. Children rested in the shade, and adults gathered to prepare the evening meal. Nahel approached Samuel again, speaking cautiously. She asked him why he had helped Ahiana. Samuel explained that he had seen a child in need and had acted instinctively. He did not expect thanks, nor did he seek anything in return. Nahel listened carefully, sensing the honesty in his voice. His words were simple, yet they carried a sincerity that could not be ignored. The village elders, who had been watching from a distance, murmured among themselves, noting the cowboy's behavior and considering what it might mean for the family and the community. By late afternoon, the desert air began to cool, and the long shadows stretched across the ground. Samuel prepared to leave, thinking his role was done, but Nahel stepped forward, her expression serious. She explained, in a calm but firm voice, that in her tradition, feeding a child created a bond that could not be broken lightly. Samuel looked surprised, realizing that he had unknowingly become part of a custom far older than the land itself. Nahel's words were not a demand, but a statement of fact, one that carried weight and meaning beyond anything he had encountered before. Samuel paused, absorbing the reality of the situation. He understood that his simple act of kindness had consequences he had not anticipated. Yet, despite the surprise and the challenge, he felt a sense of respect for Nahel and her people. He realized that living on the frontier was not only about survival, but also about understanding and honoring the lives and customs of those who had been here long before settlers arrived. The bond that had been formed, though unexpected, was now a part of his story, one that would shape his future in ways he could not yet imagine. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the settlement settled into quiet activity. Fires were lit, meals were shared, and stories were told. Ahiana played near her mother, her small hands busy with games, while Samuel sat nearby, learning from the people around him. Though the day had started like any other, it had ended with an event that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. The kindness of one man had bridged a cultural divide, and the lessons of trust, respect, and understanding had begun to take root. That night, as the stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Nahel reflected on the day's events. She thought about the courage it took to protect her daughter, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the unexpected ways in which people could connect. Samuel, too, lay under the open sky, thinking about the responsibilities he now carried, not just as a traveler or a cowboy, but as someone bound by custom and honor to a family he had barely known. The desert night was quiet, yet it was filled with possibilities, and both mother and stranger understood that life had a way of surprising even the most careful and prepared. The first chapter of their story had ended, but it was only the beginning. The bond formed that day would guide them through challenges, dangers, and lessons that neither could yet foresee. And in the heart of the Arizona desert, beneath the watchful eyes of the ancestors, the seeds of an extraordinary connection had been planted, one that would grow stronger with every passing day. The next morning, the desert woke slowly again, bathed in golden light that made the rocks and sand glow as if they held fire within. Nahel rose before the sun, her mind still on the events of the day before. The memory of the cowboy feeding Ahiana lingered like a shadow and a spark at the same time. She had spent the night thinking, not with anger, but with careful attention to what that act meant. In Apache tradition, feeding a child was a sign of care, of responsibility, and it created a bond that was serious and enduring. Nahel understood the kindness behind Samuel's gesture, but she also knew that it had woven him into the life of her family in ways that could not easily be undone. The days after the raiders' retreat brought a calm that the settlement had not felt for many weeks. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, its golden light warming the land and the people who called it home. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, but the events of the past weeks had left a deep mark on everyone. Samuel, once a wandering cowboy with no roots or responsibilities, now felt the weight of connection. He moved through the village with care, mindful of the trust the people had placed in him, and aware that every action mattered. Nahel, too, reflected on the days that had passed. She had always been a protector, guided by the wisdom of her ancestors, but now she saw the value of partnership in a new light. Samuel had not only proven himself through his courage during the raid, but also through his willingness to learn, observe, and respect the customs that defined the community. The bond formed when he fed Ahiana had grown into something much larger, an alliance built on trust, shared responsibility, and care for one another. Ahiana was brighter than ever, her curiosity renewed by the lessons she had witnessed. She followed Samuel as he helped repair fences and repair the small gardens that had been disturbed during the raid. She learned to move carefully among the rocks, to recognize the subtle signs of wildlife, and to respect the desert in ways she had only begun to understand. Samuel patiently guided her, teaching through example rather than words alone. Together, they practiced riding the horses more safely, gathering water from the wells, and understanding the paths that led safely through the rocky terrain. The elders of the village began to speak more openly to Samuel, sharing stories of their people's history, their struggles, and the lessons that had been passed down for generations. Samuel listened attentively, absorbing every detail. He realized that these stories were more than history. They were guides for living, for understanding the balance between the land and the people who depended on it. Each lesson deepened his respect for the community and for Nahel, who had raised her daughter with such wisdom and care. As the sun climbed high one afternoon, Samuel and Nahel worked together to repair a section of fencing that had been damaged in the storm the week before. The work was quiet, methodical, and allowed them to reflect on the bond they shared. Samuel paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at Nahel. "I never imagined that feeding a child could mean so much," he said softly. "It was a small act, but it changed my life. I feel part of something now, part of your family." Nahel smiled, a quiet warmth in her eyes. "It is not just the act," she replied, "but what you have done since. Your courage, your respect, and your care for all of us, that is what truly matters." That evening, the settlement gathered around the central fire, sharing food, stories, and laughter. The sense of community was stronger than ever. Children played safely nearby, their laughter echoing across the desert hills, while adults spoke quietly of the lessons learned during the raid. Samuel sat beside Nahel, watching Ahiana play, and felt a deep sense of belonging he had never known. The bond created by a simple act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a shared life, built on trust, respect, and courage. As the night deepened, Samuel took a walk along the edge of the settlement, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken. He thought about the moments of fear, the lessons of patience, and the courage that had been required to protect the village. He realized that life on the desert frontier was not just about survival, but about connection, understanding, and honor. The bond he shared with Nahel and her family had given him purpose beyond anything he had experienced in his wandering days. Over the following weeks, Samuel continued to integrate himself fully into the life of the village. He helped teach the older children about horsemanship, tracking, and the skills needed to navigate the desert safely. He worked alongside the adults to gather food, repair shelters, and maintain the water supply. Every task, whether large or small, was a chance to demonstrate commitment, care, and respect. The villagers began to see him not only as an ally but as a member of the family, someone whose actions consistently honored their ways and traditions. Ahiana, growing stronger and more confident, often sought Samuel's guidance in small adventures near the edges of the settlement. She learned to notice the subtle signs of the desert, the tracks of small animals, the movement of the wind, and the patterns in the plants that indicated water nearby. Samuel encouraged her curiosity, teaching her not just to observe but to think critically about the world around her. Nahel watched with quiet pride, knowing that her daughter was learning both from her and from the cowboy who had become such an integral part of their lives. One day, as they sat together in the shade of a rocky outcrop, Nahel spoke to Samuel about the deeper meaning of the bond he had formed. "In our tradition," she explained, "feeding a child is more than an act of kindness. It is a responsibility, a promise. You have kept that promise, not through words but through your actions. You have protected, guided, and respected us. That is what makes you part of our family." Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude and humility. He understood that his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined, and he vowed silently to honor this bond for the rest of his days. As the seasons changed, the settlement thrived. The crops grew strong, the animals were healthy, and the children flourished under the careful guidance of Nahel, Samuel, and the elders. Samuel's presence became a stabilizing force, a reminder that courage, respect, and kindness could create strong bonds even in the harshest environments. The village had faced danger and uncertainty, yet they emerged stronger and more united, with a shared sense of purpose and trust. The story of the cowboy who fed a child and became part of an Apache family began to spread quietly among neighboring settlements. It was not a tale of conquest or conflict, but of understanding, respect, and the power of simple, genuine acts of care. Samuel, who had once been a wanderer with no roots, now had a home, a purpose, and a family. Nahel, too, saw the value of welcoming him into their lives, not because of his skill alone, but because of his willingness to learn, respect, and protect. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the desert sky with deep orange and violet hues, Samuel, Nahel, and Ahiana sat together outside their tent. The quiet of the desert was calming, filled only with the soft rustle of wind through the sagebrush. Samuel reached out and took Ahiana's small hand, smiling gently. "You have taught me more than I ever imagined," he said. "Not just about the desert, but about courage, responsibility, and what it means to be part of a family." Nahel smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And you have taught us too," she replied. "You have shown that trust and respect can bridge worlds and hearts. That is a lesson we will carry forever." As the night settled in, the three of them gazed up at the stars, each one a tiny spark in the vast desert sky. Samuel felt a sense of peace he had never known. He was no longer alone, no longer wandering without direction. The bond created by a simple act of feeding a child had grown into a relationship of deep trust, shared responsibility, and love. He knew that challenges would come in the future, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. In the months and years that followed, the settlement continued to grow and thrive. Samuel became a respected member of the community, known for his courage, patience, and wisdom. He helped guide new visitors, taught young people the skills needed to navigate the desert, and remained a steadfast protector of the family that had welcomed him. Nahel continued to lead with wisdom, teaching her daughter and the village the lessons of their ancestors while embracing the new strengths Samuel brought. Ahiana grew into a confident, strong, and compassionate young girl, inspired by the courage and kindness she had witnessed in both her mother and Samuel. The story of how Samuel became part of the family after feeding Ahiana was told and retold, not as a legend of conquest, but as a lesson in kindness, trust, and the power of shared responsibility. Samuel had learned that a single act could change a life, but the choices made afterward, the courage shown in the face of danger, and the respect for others' ways were what truly defined a person. Nahel had learned that openness, guidance, and trust could bring even strangers into the fold, creating bonds that strengthened the entire community. As the years passed, the bond between Samuel, Nahel, and Ahiana remained unbroken. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, had become a place of belonging, lessons, and shared memories. They faced challenges together, celebrated victories, and grew stronger through every experience. Samuel's journey from a lone wanderer to a respected member of the Apache family was complete, not through force or luck, but through courage, respect, and a simple act of kindness that had started it all. And so, as the sun set on the desert once more, the settlement rested in peace. Samuel, Nahel, and Ahiana knew that their lives were forever connected, bound by tradition, trust, and love. The story that began with feeding a child had grown into a lifelong bond, a bond that would endure through generations, teaching everyone who heard it the power of kindness, courage, and understanding in a world where every action mattered. Ahiana, unaware of the weight of the day before, bounded out of the small tent, her hair messy and her eyes bright. She laughed as she ran to the small garden where the family grew corn and beans. She picked a few berries and held them proudly, showing them to her mother. Nahel smiled, but her eyes kept flicking toward the horizon, where Samuel had camped the previous evening. She did not know if he would return today, but she had a sense that their paths were now connected. In her heart, she hoped he would, for the bond that had begun could only grow stronger if trust continued. Meanwhile, Samuel had left the settlement that morning, riding slowly along the dusty trails. He thought about the little girl, Ahiana, and her mother, Nahel, and the unexpected responsibilities that now lay upon him. He had been a wanderer all his life, moving from one place to another, caring mostly for himself and the horses he trained. But something about the way Nahel had spoken, the calm seriousness in her eyes, the quiet authority in her voice, made him feel the weight of responsibility. It was different from anything he had experienced before. He was no longer just a traveler in the desert. He was connected to a family in a way he had never imagined. Samuel decided to return to the settlement. He rode carefully, keeping a respectful distance but ensuring he could be seen. The villagers were cautious at first, watching him approach. Some whispered quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. They had seen many outsiders pass through, and most had caused trouble. But Samuel moved slowly and deliberately, showing through his actions that he meant no harm. Nahel watched from a distance as he came closer, her eyes scanning his every movement. She noticed that he carried a small bundle of food and fresh water this time, not for himself but seemingly for the village. As Samuel entered the settlement, he greeted the elders respectfully. He offered some dried meat, fresh water, and even helped repair a small section of fencing that had been damaged by the morning wind. His movements were careful and deliberate, and his voice was calm and steady. Nahel saw all of this and felt a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. She approached him once more, her posture strong but her tone measured. "You have fed my daughter," she said quietly, "and in our tradition, that makes you part of our family now." "You must understand what that means." Samuel nodded slowly. "I do not fully understand," he admitted, "but I wish to learn. I mean no harm to your family or your people. I only wish to help." Nahel's eyes softened slightly, but she remained vigilant. The elders had gathered, their faces serious, watching the exchange. In Apache culture, words were important, but actions spoke louder than anything. Samuel's actions yesterday and today were proof of his intentions, but only time would show if his heart truly understood the responsibility he now carried. Over the following days, Samuel began to spend more time in the village, learning the routines and customs of the Apache people. He observed how the families hunted, how they gathered food, and how the children learned to respect the land. He watched Nahel teach Ahiana to carry water carefully without spilling it, to recognize edible plants, and to listen to the stories of the elders. Every task was done with care, every lesson spoken with thoughtfulness. Samuel realized that survival in this land was not just about skill, it was about patience, respect, and harmony with the earth. Ahiana grew fond of Samuel quickly. She followed him sometimes as he walked to gather wood or check the horses. She asked questions with innocent curiosity, wanting to know everything about him and the world beyond the settlement. Samuel answered patiently, telling her stories of other lands he had traveled, without exaggeration, keeping the stories simple but full of wonder. Ahiana laughed at his tales, and sometimes she would mimic his words, repeating them with her own childish mispronunciations. Nahel watched these interactions quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and caution. Samuel's patience and kindness seemed genuine, but she knew that trust must be proven over time, not just spoken in words. One afternoon, a small problem arose that tested Samuel's willingness to step into his new role. A group of wild dogs had wandered close to the village, attracted by the scent of food. The children began to cry and scatter, and Nahel's voice rose in alarm. Samuel acted without hesitation. He grabbed a long stick and moved carefully toward the dogs, using his voice and movements to drive them away without harming them. The children watched in awe, and the villagers nodded in approval. Nahel's heart swelled with both pride and relief. The cowboy had not only protected her daughter, but had also respected the safety and values of the community. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel's presence became a part of daily life. He helped hunt, repair structures, and gather water. He learned to move quietly through the desert, respecting the animals and the land. The elders began to speak to him more openly, teaching him the stories and history of the Apache people. Samuel listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that understanding a culture required more than observation. It required respect, humility, and the willingness to change. Slowly, he began to understand the deeper meaning of Nahel's words from the day he fed Ahiana. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert hills, Nahel called Samuel to sit with her by the small fire. She spoke of the traditions of the Apache people, of the bonds that connected families, and of the responsibility that came with feeding a child. Samuel listened carefully, nodding in understanding. He realized that the act of kindness he had thought was simple had far greater meaning. It was not just about giving food. It was about protecting, respecting, and honoring the family and their way of life. He felt a sense of humility and gratitude for being allowed into their lives. The bond between Samuel and the family deepened with small but meaningful moments. He taught Ahiana how to ride a horse safely, helped her practice throwing a small lasso, and listened to her stories about her dreams and fears. Nahel watched these moments closely, noting the care and attention Samuel gave to her daughter. The village, too, began to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who had chosen to respect their ways and contribute to their survival. Trust was growing slowly but surely through actions and consistent respect. Yet, even as trust grew, challenges remained. The desert was a harsh and unpredictable place. Water could run low, storms could appear suddenly, and tensions with other nearby groups were never far away. Samuel understood that his presence meant more than just companionship. It meant responsibility for the safety and well-being of the family. Every decision he made had weight, and he had to act with thoughtfulness and care. Nahel watched him navigate these challenges, silently judging each choice, but also beginning to feel the stirrings of respect and admiration for his courage and wisdom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of red and purple, Samuel and Nahel sat together outside the tent. The air was calm, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Nahel spoke quietly about the lessons of her ancestors, about how every action had meaning and every choice could affect generations. Samuel listened, absorbing the wisdom, and realizing that his journey had changed from one of wandering to one of purpose. He was no longer a lone cowboy. He was part of a family and a community that had welcomed him into their lives, and he could not take that lightly. By the end of the second week, Samuel's presence was fully accepted by most of the village. Children ran to greet him, elders nodded respectfully, and Nahel herself began to trust him more openly. The bond formed by feeding Ahiana had grown into a connection based on respect, shared responsibility, and understanding. Samuel knew that challenges lay ahead, but he also knew that he had found a place in the desert that felt like home, a place where kindness, respect, and courage were valued above all else. And so life in the settlement continued, with Samuel learning, helping, and growing alongside Nahel and Ahiana. Each day brought small adventures, lessons, and moments of connection. The bond that had begun with a simple act of feeding a child had begun to transform into something deeper, a relationship of trust, care, and shared destiny. The desert, harsh and unyielding, had brought together people from different worlds, showing that kindness and respect could bridge even the widest gaps. The story of Samuel and Nahel was just beginning. The challenges of the desert, the traditions of the Apache, and the unpredictability of life would soon test the strength of their bond even further. But in these early days, there was hope, trust, and a growing understanding that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of a lifetime. As the days passed, the connection between Samuel and Nahel grew stronger, but it was also tested in ways neither of them could have predicted. Life on the desert frontier was never easy, and each day brought new challenges. One morning, Samuel awoke to the distant sound of commotion. He looked toward the horizon and saw a group of riders approaching the settlement. Their figures were blurry in the heat waves rising from the sand, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Nahel, standing at the edge of the camp, had already noticed them. Her eyes narrowed, and her hand instinctively rested on the small knife at her belt. The approaching riders were not strangers, but they carried an air of unease. They were ranchers from a nearby area, concerned about the safety of their cattle and horses. Some feared that Apache children or livestock might be involved in theft, while others simply mistrusted the presence of outsiders. Samuel recognized the riders immediately. He had crossed paths with some of them during his travels, but this was not a friendly encounter. He understood that tensions were high and that even a small misunderstanding could escalate quickly into danger. Nahel called the villagers together. She spoke with calm authority, instructing the adults to prepare for dialogue, while ensuring the children remained safely within the settlement. Ahiana clung to her mother, sensing that something serious was unfolding. Samuel moved quietly beside them, his presence steadying the younger villagers. Though he had been a wanderer for much of his life, he now felt a deep responsibility for the people around him. His bond with Nahel and Ahiana had transformed him, giving him purpose beyond his own survival. As the riders drew closer, Nahel stepped forward to meet them. Her posture was firm, her eyes unwavering. She greeted them with respect but did not allow fear to dictate her words. "We live here in peace," she said calmly, "and we take care of our own. We ask only that you respect our home and our ways." The riders hesitated, unsure how to respond. They had expected either hostility or submission, not quiet confidence. Samuel remained behind Nahel, careful not to overstep, yet ready to act if the situation escalated. The eldest rider, a man named Thomas, spoke with a mixture of suspicion and authority. "We've heard rumors of stolen livestock and strangers moving through the desert," he said. "We mean no harm, but we must be certain that our property and families are safe." Nahel listened carefully and responded with patience, explaining that the Apache settlement respected property and worked hard to survive. She spoke of the harshness of the desert, the importance of cooperation, and the dangers that outsiders often underestimated. Her words were measured, and her tone carried the weight of experience and wisdom. Samuel noticed the subtle reactions of the riders. Some softened, listening to her explanation. Others remained skeptical, their hands brushing the reins of their horses as if preparing for conflict. He understood that respect and trust could not be demanded, they had to be earned. He decided to act, not with words but with deeds. He stepped forward and offered assistance, showing that he was aligned with Nahel and the settlement, not against them. He helped guide the horses into a safe area and ensured that no child or livestock was in harm's way. His actions spoke louder than words, demonstrating his commitment to the safety and well-being of the community. The riders observed Samuel closely. His calm demeanor and practical help began to shift the tension slightly. Thomas, the eldest rider, asked cautiously, "Who is this man?" Nahel spoke softly but firmly. "He is one who helped my daughter when she was in need. By our tradition, he is now part of our family. He has chosen to honor our ways and protect us, as anyone bound by this bond must do." The riders exchanged glances, clearly surprised. They had not encountered a culture where an act of kindness could carry such meaning. Some seemed impressed, others remained wary. The encounter with the riders lasted for hours. Questions were asked, answers given, and slowly a fragile understanding began to form. Samuel stayed close to Nahel, ready to act if necessary, but careful to respect her leadership. He realized that the trust he had earned was fragile, and that every gesture, every word carried importance. Ahiana, hiding slightly behind her mother, watched the proceedings with wide eyes. She was learning, even in these tense moments, the strength and wisdom of her mother and the responsibility that came with caring for others. After the riders eventually departed, the settlement exhaled collectively. Relief swept through the village like a cool breeze after a long day under the scorching sun. The elders gathered to discuss the event, praising Nahel's wisdom and Samuel's calm assistance. "He acted well," one elder remarked, "but he must continue to prove that his heart is aligned with ours. Trust is built not in a single act but in many." Nahel nodded, acknowledging the truth in these words. Samuel understood that his journey with the Apache was just beginning, and that the challenges ahead would require not only courage, but patience, understanding, and humility. In the days that followed, Samuel continued to integrate himself into the daily life of the village. He accompanied hunters into the desert, learning the patterns of the land and the behavior of the animals. He helped repair shelters damaged by wind and sandstorms, and he assisted the women in carrying water from distant wells. With each act, he demonstrated his commitment to the settlement and to Nahel's family. The villagers began to see him not as an outsider, but as a steady presence, someone who had chosen to respect their ways and contribute to their survival. One afternoon, As Samuel and Nahel walked along a narrow trail to check on a small herd of goats, they encountered a natural challenge that would test their trust and teamwork. A sudden rainstorm had turned the dirt paths into slippery mud, and rocks had become dangerous to step on. Samuel carefully guided Ahiana, who was learning to navigate the terrain herself, while Nahel took the lead in instructing them where to step. Their combined effort demonstrated a new level of coordination and understanding. Samuel began to grasp that being part of this family was not only about protection, but about collaboration, respect, and shared responsibility. During quiet moments, Nahel shared stories of her ancestors with Samuel. She spoke of the spirits of the desert, the lessons of the elders, and the wisdom embedded in every action. Samuel listened attentively, realizing that survival in this land was more than physical skill. It was knowledge, history, and respect passed through generations. He began to understand that the bond he had formed by feeding Ahiana went far beyond obligation. It was about learning, growing, and honoring a way of life that had endured for centuries. However, not all moments were peaceful. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, a new tension emerged. A young boy from the village had wandered too far while exploring and had become frightened when a coyote approached. Samuel and Nahel were nearby and acted quickly. Samuel's calm voice and steady hands reassured the boy, while Nahel instructed the children on how to remain safe during encounters with wild animals. The incident was small, but it highlighted the constant vigilance required in the desert. Samuel realized that being part of the family meant more than helping in visible ways. It meant being prepared for the unseen dangers that came with life in this harsh land. By the end of the third week, Samuel's presence had become a quiet reassurance to the village. The children laughed more freely around him, the adults respected his judgment, and Nahel's confidence in his character had grown significantly. Yet, both Samuel and Nahel understood that the true test of his bond with the family had not yet come. The desert, the traditions, and the unpredictable nature of life in the frontier held many challenges, and they knew that the coming days would test courage, wisdom, and the strength of trust. One evening, as the stars began to appear one by one in the clear desert sky, Samuel sat beside the fire with Nahel. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. "I have learned more than I ever imagined," Samuel said, his voice calm and sincere. "I thought I was helping, but you have taught me how to respect, how to observe, and how to be patient. I see now that trust is earned every day." Nahel nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "And you have shown that your heart is willing," she replied. "But the desert is not gentle. It will test you in ways you cannot yet know. You must be ready." As they spoke, Ahiana slept peacefully nearby, unaware of the depth of the lessons being taught. The bond between Samuel and the family had grown stronger through these experiences. It was no longer simply about feeding a child. It had become a relationship built on respect, trust, and shared responsibility. Samuel understood that he was no longer a wandering cowboy but a protector, a learner, and a participant in a story much larger than himself. The coming days promised both challenges and growth. Samuel and Nahel knew that life in the desert would continue to test them, but the foundation of trust they had built would guide them through the uncertainties ahead. Each action, each word, and each decision would shape the story of their lives together, and the bond that began with a simple act of kindness would be strengthened by courage, understanding, and honor. And so, as the fire burned low and the desert night settled around them, the stage was set for the next chapter, a chapter where bonds would be tested, courage would be required, and the strength of trust would face its first true trials. Samuel understood that the days of learning and observation were ending, and the days of proving himself had just begun. The desert was unusually quiet that morning. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but the calm was deceptive. Samuel had woken early, sensing an unease in the air that even the most practiced eyes might not immediately notice. Nahel, too, was alert, her senses finely tuned to the rhythms of the land. Something was different. The usual sounds of birds and small animals were missing. Even Ahiana seemed subdued, her playful laughter replaced with quiet curiosity as she watched her mother and Samuel move about the settlement. By mid-morning, the source of tension became clear. A group of riders, larger and more aggressive than any Samuel had seen before, appeared over the distant hills. They were not friendly neighbors or curious travelers. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust as they approached, their faces stern and determined. Samuel recognized the signs immediately. These were raiders, intent on taking livestock and causing fear. Nahel's heart tightened, but she did not panic. She had prepared for such moments her entire life, teaching her people how to protect themselves and the land. Now that preparation would be put to the ultimate test. Nahel quickly gathered the elders and a few trusted villagers. She explained the situation calmly, issuing instructions with precision. Some would protect the children and gather them in the safest areas of the settlement. Others would secure the animals and hide them in the rocky hills nearby. Samuel moved swiftly to assist, his knowledge of horses and survival complementing Nahel's careful planning. Though he had never faced an attack like this, he felt a deep responsibility to protect the family and the village that had accepted him. Ahiana clung to her mother, her small hands gripping tightly. She had witnessed the seriousness in her mother's eyes and the determination in Samuel's movements. Though she was young, she understood that danger was near. Nahel knelt beside her daughter, holding her close. "Stay quiet, stay safe, and trust us," she whispered. Samuel moved a few steps away, ready to intercept any threat that might reach the children. He had learned much about the desert, about the land, and about the Apache people in the weeks he had spent here. But this was different. This was not a lesson in survival or patience. It was a test of courage, trust, and quick thinking under pressure. The raiders arrived at the edge of the settlement, shouting and brandishing weapons. Their intention was clear: to intimidate and take what they wanted. But Nahel stood firm, her voice carrying authority and calm. "You will not harm the children, the families, or the land," she declared. "Leave now or face the consequences." The raiders laughed, underestimating the resolve of the small Apache community. They had counted on fear and chaos, but instead they encountered preparation, coordination, and determination. Samuel stepped forward, his presence steady and commanding, signaling that he was ready to act if the raiders moved closer. The confrontation escalated quickly. One raider charged toward the animals, intending to steal a goat. Samuel acted without hesitation, intercepting him and using his strength and skill to guide the horse back without harming the rider. The movement was precise, demonstrating both courage and control. Nahel and the villagers worked together, moving the children to safer positions while protecting the settlement. Rocks were used to create barriers, and the sound of shouted instructions filled the air. The raiders were frustrated. This was not the easy victory they had anticipated. Ahiana watched from behind a large rock, clutching her mother's hand. Her heart raced, but she also felt a strange sense of pride and safety. Samuel and Nahel were acting decisively, showing bravery that inspired everyone around them. She realized that the bond between her mother and the cowboy was not just about protection. It was about leadership, wisdom, and courage. Every movement, every decision was a lesson for her, even in the midst of danger. The raiders grew more aggressive, attempting to break the defenses of the settlement. Samuel noticed a group moving around the edge, trying to flank the village. He signaled Nahel, and together they coordinated a countermove. Some villagers distracted the raiders, while others guided the children and animals to hidden paths through the rocky terrain. Samuel used his knowledge of the land to predict the raiders' movements, placing himself strategically to block any advance. The coordination between him and Nahel was seamless, born from trust and understanding built over weeks of shared experience. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, beating down on everyone in the settlement. The raiders, exhausted and frustrated, realized that the villagers would not yield easily. Samuel and Nahel stood as symbols of resistance and protection, their actions inspiring the community to hold firm. The children watched quietly, learning the value of courage, strategy, and the importance of defending what was theirs. Ahiana, though small and frightened, understood that her safety depended not only on strength, but also on intelligence, coordination, and the willingness to act decisively. As the confrontation reached its peak, a critical moment arrived. One raider broke away from the group, attempting to seize a young child who had wandered slightly from the safe area. Samuel reacted instantly, intercepting the raider and using his body to shield the child. Nahel, seeing the danger, moved with swift precision to assist, guiding other villagers to ensure no one else was exposed. The raider struggled, but Samuel's strength and determination held firm, while Nahel's voice carried authority, instructing the raider to leave and reminding him of the consequences. The raider, surprised by the coordinated defense, hesitated. Samuel and Nahel did not harm him, but made it clear that any further aggression would not be tolerated. Slowly, the remaining raiders realized that their attack was failing. The settlement was too prepared, the people too united, and the bond between Samuel, Nahel, and the community too strong. One by one, the raiders withdrew, retreating back to the hills from which they had come. The threat had passed, but the lesson remained clear. Courage, strategy, and unity could overcome even the greatest dangers. After the raiders left, the settlement breathed a collective sigh of relief. Children emerged from their hiding places, and the adults assessed the minor damages and injuries. Samuel and Nahel moved among the villagers, checking that everyone was safe. Ahiana ran to her mother, hugging her tightly, and Samuel knelt beside them, smiling gently. The danger was over, but the events had strengthened the bonds between everyone in the settlement, particularly between Samuel and Nahel's family. That evening, around the fire, the village shared stories of the confrontation. Elders praised the bravery of Samuel and Nahel, noting the skill, strategy, and calm under pressure that had protected the community. Samuel listened humbly, understanding that the respect he had earned was not permanent, but must be continually reinforced through actions and integrity. Nahel spoke to her daughter, emphasizing the lessons of courage, teamwork, and the importance of protecting those you love. Ahiana listened intently, understanding in a new way what it meant to be part of a family and a community. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to routine. The animals were cared for, the children returned to play, and the village continued its daily activities. Yet the memory of the confrontation lingered, a reminder of both danger and resilience. Samuel found a new sense of purpose. He was no longer a wandering cowboy. He was a protector, a partner, and a participant in a story that would shape his life forever. Nahel observed him with quiet approval, recognizing that he had proven his courage, loyalty, and understanding of their ways. Ahiana, inspired by the bravery she had witnessed, practiced new skills alongside her mother and Samuel. She learned to move quietly through the desert, to observe patterns in the wind and the animals, and to respect the strength and wisdom of those around her. The events of the confrontation had become lessons in courage, preparedness, and the importance of trust. Each day brought opportunities to grow stronger, wiser, and more connected to the land, and the people who called it home. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the desert, Samuel, Nahel, and Ahiana sat together outside their tent. The air was calm and the settlement was quiet, the villagers resting after the trials of the day. Samuel spoke softly, reflecting on the events. "I thought I knew what courage was," he said, "but I've learned it is more than strength. It is patience, wisdom, and the willingness to protect those who cannot defend themselves." Nahel nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And it is respect for the land, the people, and the bonds that connect us," she replied. The desert night stretched wide and silent, filled with stars that seemed to watch over the small settlement. Samuel understood that this was only the beginning. The bond that had begun with a simple act of feeding a child had grown into something far greater: courage, trust, and shared destiny. The challenges of the desert were far from over, but the events of the day had proven that together they could face whatever came their way. And so, as the fire burned low and the night deepened, Samuel, Nahel, and Ahiana rested, knowing that the strength of their bond would guide them through the challenges to come. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had tested them, and they had emerged stronger, united, and ready for the next chapter of their lives.